This is cs952 Introduction to Web Technologies and Design, and we're covering CSS selectors, tags, IDs, and classes. So we applied the H1 formatting to this text. We didn't have to create any kind of special rule for our H1 tag. Our H1 tag already existed. It's right over here. Tags are already included in HTML code. Every web browser knows what a tag is. And we used the tag as a CSS selector. It was the common element between our HTML file and our CSS file. Now, on the other hand, IDs and classes need to be created. They're not pre-existing parts of web code. There are no pre-existing IDs or classes in HTML. One of the reasons that we're using the Bootstrap 3 framework is because Bootstrap includes a number of really useful CSS classes. Now, these classes come to us courtesy of Bootstrap and are not included in a basic web page. And by contrast, again, a basic web page includes all the HTML tags. So let's look at an example of a pre-existing Bootstrap class. So looking in my document object model, I can see I've got an H1 tag. That's the thing that says Internet Sales. And then I've got a div that holds various buttons. These are my buttons for my navigation. So everything that we're looking at on the page right now is contained within a div that has the class of column small 12. Now this class is a Bootstrap class, and that's contained inside of another div that's in a class of row, which is also a Bootstrap class. And that's contained inside of another div that has a class of container. Again, these are all Bootstrap classes. So I've got this div selected that says class column small 12. And we go into a little bit more detail about what this class means in the video on the Bootstrap responsive grid. But let's use an existing Bootstrap class, one that comes to us courtesy of Bootstrap, to center the text on this page. So with my div selected, I can go to my class. We're looking at the properties inspector, and I'm going to click on class here, and I get this long list of all these classes. Now these classes all come to us via Bootstrap. If we had a blank HTML document, there would be nothing in this list, but because we're using Bootstrap, you can see the huge number of classes that Bootstrap gives us. You can see some here for controlling the appearance of text. So I'm going to keep scrolling down, and I'm going to choose a class called Text Center. And anytime we apply a class of Text Center to any HTML tag, it's going to take on this property of Text Center. So the HTML tag that we're applying this class to right now is actually a div tag. And this div tag is working as a container that holds everything that we're looking at on the web page. So let's click on Text Center. And when I do that, you can now see that everything's been centered, right? All my buttons are centered, my text is centered. This is super helpful. So I did that by applying it to this div tag, and if I look at it now, it says the class equals Text Center. Now we talked about how we're going to be using tags, IDs, and classes. We've looked at tags and classes. The last remaining component is the ID. Now, IDs and classes are really important to web design. We're going to be using CSS IDs and classes over and over again in every module. Now, to me, IDs and classes sound like they would be quite different, two entirely different things. But as it turns out, IDs and classes are practically identical with one major difference. A class can be used as many times as you want to on a web page over and over again. So we can have one item that's a member of several classes, and we're going to see this in this example, but an ID can be used only once. This is a fundamental principle. Classes used over and over again on a web page, an ID can be used only once. So in this example, I have a bunch of boxes that I want to use for my navigation. And I want the color of the text for all these boxes to be red. So if I make all these boxes a member of the same class, then if I change the property of that class, everything that's a member of that class will have its property change as well. So let's create a new class. I've got my styles file selected. I'm going to add a new class. And I create a new class by defining a selector. Remember, selectors are the things that are in common between HTML and CSS. So let's create a new selector, and I'm going to call my new selector dot nav special buttons. Okay, so that's what I'm calling it, nav special buttons. And I'm going to hit enter. And I want my text color for nav special buttons to be red. So I'm going to click on text, and I'm going to click down to my text properties, and where we have color, remember we talked about RGB is red, green, and blue? So for my color, I'm going to type in 255, and it's all red. If I go to hex, it's going to be FF0000. Again, this is covered in more detail in our color section, but this makes for pure red, right? There we go, FF0000. So this is going to be pure red. I'm going to hit enter. Now just creating the selector doesn't do anything. I need to assign it to something. We didn't have to do that with the H1 tag because the H1 tag is already built in to the internet. It's already built into web code. But just creating a selector doesn't do anything until we assign it to an HTML element. So I'm going to click on my first button here. Okay, this is my first button. I can see in my document object panel, here is the HTML element button. And under class, I'm going to assign it to nav special buttons. So if I look around here, I'm going to see my new class listed down here. We've got all kinds of nav stuff in here. Here it is. Look, nav special buttons. And we can already see that it's red. So let's click on that. Now, my home button is red. Let's do the same thing to specials. I'm going to go to specials, and I'm also going to assign it to nav special button. Here we go. Nav special buttons. We'll do the same thing to reviews. Assign that to, come on here, help me out. Got a lot of things to slip through. Nav special buttons, contact. Also going to make that a member of nav special buttons. And specials. Going to make that a member of nav special buttons. There we go. I'm using this class over and over again. If we look at our DOM panel, Document Object Model panel, if we look at our DOM panel, and remember DOM is just a fancy word for a web page, we can see here's the div that holds all of my navigation, and then inside of it, let's open that up, inside of it we've got a button and a button and a button. These represent the 5 buttons we're viewing, and they're all members of our special buttons class. And because they're all members of the same class, if I do any change to my styling rule for this class, everything that's a member of it's going to change. So for example, let's say if I decided I wanted to underline this text. Under text decoration, I could choose underline, and if I click on text decoration, now everything has an underline. Because it's a member of the class, we can use it over and over again. We change any one element that is a member of that class, that rule is going to be applied to all elements that are members of that class. Okay, let's come back and look at how IDs work.